A father acted strangely nervous during a routine checkup with his 5 young daughters when the nurse sees their blood test results. She starts to panic and realizes something is terribly wrong. The late evening air hung heavy with humidity in McAllen, Texas, a small border town known for its steady stream of migrant crossings. Just a stone's throw from the Rio Grande, the Rio Care Family Health Center stood as a beacon of hope for many seeking medical attention, both locals and those hoping to make a new life on American soil. Elena Marquez moved efficiently around the emergency room, her dark hair pulled back in a practical bun as she filed away patient paperwork at 35. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who knew her profession. Well, despite having relocated from San Antonio just the previous week, the walls of the clinic still felt unfamiliar, but the routine of healthcare was the same anywhere. The clock on the wall read 8:00 p.m. Elena glanced at it with mild relief. Only 2 hours until closing the clinic had been bustling earlier, but the crowd had thinned considerably as the evening wore on. Now most of the remaining patients in the waiting area appeared to be immigrants, their faces etched with the particular mix of hope and weariness that Elena had quickly learned to recognize. She walked out of the ER room into the waiting area, having just finished with a patient. The fluorescent lights cast a harsh glow over the worn tile floor as she returned to the nurse station to complete some paperwork. As she worked, Eleanor's eyes drifted across the waiting room, settling on a man sitting with 5 young girls. They were all dressed simply but neatly, the girls in similar jeans and colorful tops. The man appeared to be of Mexican descent, his expression a mixture of fatigue and nervousness. Elena turned to the fellow nurse standing nearby, a man in his 40s named Carlos, who had been efficiently handling the flow of patients all evening. "Who were they waiting for?" Elena asked quietly, nodding toward the family. Carlos looked up from his computer screen, his eyes briefly scanning the waiting area before returning to his work. "I think they've been waiting for a while." "I'm not sure," he replied kindly, though it was clear he was preoccupied. Elena frowned slightly. "Have they had their vitals taken?" "It's standard procedure before seeing the doctor. I don't think so." Carlos responded, still focused on his screen. "They've just been waiting there." Elena nodded decisively. "I'll check them out." She approached the family, offering a warm smile as she came to stand before them. The man looked up at her approach, his expression difficult to read. "Hello, I'm Nurse Elena Marquez," she introduced herself. "Have you had your vitals checked yet?" The man straightened in his seat. "We're waiting for Dr. Alan Briggs for vaccinations and some blood tests." Elena tilted her head slightly. "May I ask for what purpose to complete our papers?" The man explained, his voice low and steady. "To pass the border to the USA." Elena considered this for a moment. "I haven't seen Dr. Briggs all day today. Let me check for you, but first may I see your patient registration paper?" The man reached into his pocket and produced a folded form which he handed to Elena. She scanned it quickly, noting the details. Mateo Ruiz, 42 years old, accompanied by Sophia, 10, Isabella, 9, Valentina, Tiana, 7, and Lucia, 5. All were listed as Mexican nationals. Elena looked at each of the girls in turn, struck by their unusual stillness. They sat quietly beside Mateo, with the youngest, Lucia, perched on his lap. There was none of the fidgeting or whispering that Elena typically associated with children, especially after a long wait. "All right," Elena said with a reassuring smile. "Please wait here. I'll check on Dr. Briggs's schedule." She returned to the nurse station where Carlos was now entering data into the computer. "Dr. Briggs isn't working today. He informed her when she asked he had an emergency appointment and took the day off. Elena frowned. The man over there says, "He has an appointment with Dr. Briggs specifically, and the children, they're unusually quiet. Don't you think that's strange?" He looked at the family again, this time more intently. "I think I've seen that man before. He's a patient of Dr. Briggs, don't worry about him. And honestly, he's lucky to have daughters who behave so well. Otherwise, he'd be living in a jungle. There's a lot of immigrants here, so I just want to be extra careful when something seems unusual." Carlos glanced over at the family. "Welcome to Border Town Healthcare," he said, with a slight shrug. Elena hesitated but nodded. "Maybe they're just well behaved." She returned to Mateo and the girls. "I'm sorry, but Dr. Briggs is off work today. The system mentioned he has an emergency appointment." Outside the clinic, Mateo's expression shifted, a flash of confusion and nervousness crossing his features before he regained his composure. "You don't understand," he said, his voice tighter than before. "I have an appointment with Dr. Briggs. The doctor himself told me to come here at this day and time." Elena tried to remain professional. "It looks like you might already have his personal number. Perhaps you could try reaching out to him directly. We are aware that many family doctors, especially ones like Dr. Briggs, often share their personal numbers for follow-ups." Mateo's face darkened with anger. "What kind of service is this?" he demanded, his voice rising slightly. "You should call the doctor. We have an appointment here. This is the clinic where he works. I understand your frustration," Helena said calmly. "Please excuse me while I try to reach him." She walked back to the nurse station where Carlos was now tending to another patient. Elena picked up the phone and dialed Dr. Briggs's number, but there was no answer. She tried his home number, as listed in the hospital database, with the same result. As she waited through the ring cycles, Elena glanced back toward Mateo. He was visibly anxious now, scratching his head, shifting in his seat and typing rapidly on his phone. The contrast between his agitation and the girl's stillness struck her as even more peculiar. After several failed attempts to reach Dr. Briggs, Elena headed back to speak with Mateo. As she approached, she saw him rise from his seat and answer a phone call, stepping away toward the emergency staircase for privacy. The girls remained in their seats unmoving. Elena waited with them, attempting small talk with the children. But none of them responded beyond brief nods or one-word answers from beyond the emergency door. She caught fragments of Mateo's increasingly agitated conversation. "Tomorrow? Yes, give me time. Please, yes, I'll pay." Elena looked around, wondering if anyone else had heard, but the remaining staff and patients were engrossed in their own concerns. A sense of unease began to settle in her stomachs. She waited for Mateo to return. Mateo returned from the stairwell, his face set in a mask of controlled tension. As he approached Elena, she offered a professional smile, though her instincts were quietly sounding alarms. "I tried Dr. Briggs's phone and home number, but I couldn't reach him," she explained. "I'm very sorry for the inconvenience." Mateo looked frustrated but not violent. He ran a hand through his hair. "I'm wasting time here," he said, his voice low but intense. "I really need to get the girls vaccinated because we plan to go across the border and seek asylum I had arranged. Pick up there, and with this delay, everything else on my schedule will be affected too." Elena took another look at the patient registration papers, carefully studying the details she had only skimmed. "Before I see you, need vaccinations for DTaPIPV, which covers diphtheria, tetanus pertussis, and polio, MMRV for measles, MS, rubella, and varicella, plus hepatitis A and hepatitis B. This is for your asylum application procedure, correct?" Mateo nodded tersely. "Yes, that's right." "Well," Elena said, making a quick decision. If you don't mind, I can administer the vaccinations myself. I'm a nurse practitioner, so I'm qualified to do this. We'll also need to do a blood test as part of the pre-vaccine health screening. It's standard to screen for hepatitis B. Run a standard blood test. Matteo's eyes widened slightly. Blood test, they don't need that. The children are fine. Elena maintained her professional demeanor. Due to our clinic being in a border town, it's standard procedure, Herano. Matteo said firmly. That's not necessary. Elena considered for a moment, then offered an alternative. We have other doctors in the clinic who could see you, but there's a queue at the moment. You would need to wait until those registered patients are served first, or if someone cancels or skips their appointment, I could help insert you in between. She paused, then added, but the doctor would also order the same blood tests that I mentioned. Matteo seemed torn, his eyes darting between Elena and the girls who continued to sit in eerie stillness. Would you be doing this alone? Asked finally. No other practitioners. And you'll drop the sample at the lab yourself and check the results. Yourself? Elena found the question strange, but answered professionally. Yes, as a nurse practitioner, I can order the lab tests and handle the sample collection and paperwork. I'll sign it along with the lab tech staff, but I'm not authorized to sign. The official lab results only. Authorized lab personnel can do that. Matteo seemed to be weighing his options. Carefully, he pulled out his phone and appeared to be looking at previous lab reports, though the text was too small for Elena to read without. Being obvious about her interest after a long moment, he exhaled deeply. Okay, he said, meeting her eyes. I'll trust you. Relief washed over Elena. Great, she said, gesturing toward the hallway. Please follow me, all of you, as they walked down the corridor. Elena couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. The girls moved in near-perfect unison, following their father without a word or glance at their surroundings. In Elena's experience, children in clinics were typically curious, nervous, or both, but these girls. As they walked down the corridor, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. The girls moved in near-perfect unison, following their father without a word or glance at their surroundings. In Elena's experience, children in clinics were typically curious, nervous, or both. But these girls displayed neither emotion. She led them to an examination room, trying to maintain a cheerful demeanor that belied her growing concern. She reassured herself that if something was wrong, the blood test would reveal it. We'll start with taking everyone's vitals and then move on to the blood draw, she explained, directing them to the chairs along the wall. Matteo nodded, silently, his eyes following Elena's every move as she prepared. Her equipment, the weight of his gaze, made her increasingly uncomfortable, but she focused on her professional duties. The examination room was painted a calm shade of blue, though the effect was somewhat diminished by the harsh fluorescent lighting. Standard medical posters adorned the walls depicting human anatomy and common childhood ailments. Elena gestured for the girls to sit on the chairs arranged against the wall while she prepared her equipment. I'll take your vitals one by one, starting with Sophia, Elena said, smiling at the oldest girl. She worked, methodically checking Sophia's blood pressure, temperature, pulse, and oxygen levels. The girl complied silently, her large brown eyes focused on some indeterminate point on the floor. Elena tried to engage her with casual questions about school and favorite subjects, but Sophia's responses were minimal, uttered just above a whisper. You're doing great, Sophia, Elena encouraged, making a note on her chart, before moving on to Isabella. Elena repeated the process, with each girl finding the same pattern, with all of them quiet compliance. minimal eye contact and brief responses. Matteo stood nearby, arms crossed his eyes, never leaving the proceedings. Would you like to wait outside while I draw their blood? Elena suggested to Matteo as she prepared the blood collection equipment. Some parents find it difficult to watch. No, Matteo replied firmly. I'll stay with my daughters. Elena nodded, not wanting to push further. She began with Sophia again, gently explaining what she was doing as she tied the tourniquet around the girl's arm and swabbed the inside of her. Elbow with alcohol. This will pinch a little, she warned softly, before inserting the needle. Sophia didn't flinch, her expression remaining unchanged as Elena filled the collection tubes. You're very brave, Elena commented, applying a bandage to the puncture site. Sophia didn't respond as Elena worked through drawing blood from each child. She continued her attempts at friendly conversation, hoping to coax some personality from them. Do you girls have a favorite game you like to play? She asked as she drew blood from Valentina. Before any of the girls could answer, Matteo interjected, They don't play much, they study, it's important for their future. Elena noted the edge in his voice and how the girls seemed to shrink slightly at his intervention. She caught Valentina glancing quickly at her father before lowering her eyes again. After collecting all the samples, Elena labeled each one carefully, with the patient barcode aware of Matteo's unwavering attention to her actions. I'll take these to the lab. Now, Elena said, gathering the labeled tubes, you can wait here for a few minutes. No, Matteo said, rising from his chair. Will come with you, Elena. Hesitated, finding his insistence unusual, but couldn't think of a professional reason to refuse. All right, follow me. They walked through the corridor to the lab, Matteo herding the girls along behind Elena, like a flock of silent ducklings at the lab. Window Elena handed over the tray of samples to a technician inside before she could turn away. Matteo stepped forward, calling to the lab technician, Those are for my children, he said, pointing to himself. I'm Matteo Ruiz. Elena watched this interaction with surprise. It was not common for patients to address lab technicians directly about their samples. You seem like a very responsible father, Elena commented. As they stepped away from the lab window and the girls, all behaved very well, though she kept her tone light. Elena was probing. Trying to understand the dynamics at play, something felt off. Though she couldn't pinpoint exactly what was wrong, Matteo's expression softened slightly in Mexico. It's very common for samples to get mixed up in labs, he explained. I just want to make sure everything is accurate. Elena nodded, understandingly. You don't need to worry. We're very careful with samples here, she assured him. She gestured toward the waiting area near the lab. You can wait here for the results, it shouldn't take too long. As she turned to leave, she added, I'll come to find you for the vaccination. Walking away, Elena couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something wasn't right with the Ruiz family. The girl's unnatural quietness, Matteo's hovering presence, his insistence on following her to the lab, all of it struck her as unusual. Still, she couldn't help but wonder if she was overanalyzing things. Maybe Matteo was simply a protective father, or perhaps it was a cultural difference. Things were certainly different here than in Mexico, without any concrete signs of wrongdoing. All she could do was uphold her professionalism and remain quietly observant. Elena returned to the nurse station, her mind still preoccupied with the Ruiz family. The clinic was noticeably quieter now. With less than an hour until closing time, only a handful of patients remained in the waiting room, most looking tired after what was likely a long day. Carlos was at the desk, updating patient records in the computer system. Elena leaned against the counter beside him, keeping her voice low. That man with the 5 daughters. "Did you notice how strange they were acting?" she asked. Carlos looked up from his screen. "What do you mean?" "The girls were just so quiet," Elena explained, "and the father followed me all the way to the lab, watched me hand over the samples, and even called out to the lab tech to make sure they knew which samples belonged to his children." Carlos chuckled, shaking his head slightly. "This is Border Town Clinic, Elena. Every day strange things happen here. You need to learn to tell the difference between culture shock and real threats." Elena considered his words. "I know it's not wrong. Per se, it just seems weird. I felt the same way during my first few months here," Carlos said with a sympathetic smile. "You'll get used to it." Elena nodded slowly, not entirely convinced, but willing to consider that her newcomer status might be coloring her. "Perceptions, by the way. What about Dr. Briggs? I've been here a week and haven't seen him." "Oh, he's a senior doctor here," Carlos replied, "one of the best in this border town. He works here, but not exclusively. He also takes private consultations and does patient visitations. So maybe Mateo was somehow mistaken, or there was some miscommunication between him and the doctor." Carlos shrugged. "It happens. Dr. Briggs has a lot of patients, especially among the immigrant community. He's built quite a reputation." Their conversation was interrupted by another staff member needing Carlos's assistance. Elena excused herself and headed toward the ER to ensure everything was in order for closing. As she walked, she caught sight of Mateo through a window. He was outside in the clinic's parking lot on his phone again. The 5 girls were with him, 3 of them leaning against each other, seemingly asleep, while sitting on Amatil bench. The youngest, Lucia, was still awake, holding her father's hand as he spoke. On the phone, Elena watched as Mateo stepped away from the bench. Still on the call, Lucia followed him initially, but he gestured for her to stay with her sisters. The little girl reluctantly complied, returning to sit beside her sleeping siblings. Mateo moved further away, his expression growing increasingly agitated as he spoke from her vantage point. Elena saw Amin approach Mateo from the shadows of the parking lot. The stranger wore casual clothes, his face half hidden in the dim evening light. Mateo's posture changed. Immediately he stood straighter, his movements becoming more differential as he patted the man's shoulder. Concerned about the children left alone on the bench, Elena decided to check on them. She exited through the ER doors and approached the girls. Lucia perked up slightly at her approach, though the older girls remained asleep or in a state close to it. Mateo quickly noticed Elena's presence and ended his conversation with a hasty wave and a brief handshake to the stranger, who slipped away into the shadows. He hurried back to the bench, his expression a mixture of surprise and weariness. "Is something wrong?" he asked Elena, positioning himself between her and the girls. "I saw the girls outside and wanted to make sure." "They're okay," Elena explained. "It's getting late." Mateo relaxed slightly. "They're just tired." "You're welcome to come back inside," Elena offered. "It's more comfortable with the air conditioning." "It's okay," Mateo insisted. "Leave the girls here. They love the warm outside compared to Thadri." Air conditioner. Before Elena could respond, her pager beeped. She glanced down at it. The message was from the lab. "The results are ready," she told Mateo. "I'll come find you after I check them, and then we can proceed with the vaccinations." Mateo nodded his gaze. Following her as she returned to the building, Elena couldn't help but feel that his eyes on her back, watching her. Every move the corridor to the lab felt longer than usual as Elena made her way, down it, her footsteps echoing against the linoleum floor. Her pager felt heavy in her pocket. The simple message from the lab carrying a weight she couldn't quite explain. At the lab window, a technician, a middle-aged man named Donnie Rain, whom Elena had interacted with a few times during her first week, handed her the results for the 5 girls. "Everything looks normal," Donnie said with a casual smile, though Elena noticed traces of sweat on his brow despite the cool temperature in the lab healthy kids. Elena observed him briefly, a flicker of recognition stirring in his posture, then offered a polite thank you before stepping aside to review the results. Her eyes moved steadily across the pages, scanning for any irregularities or warning signs. According to the reports, all 5 girls had normal blood work, no trace of drugs or anything else alarming. In their systems, relief washed over her despite her suspicions about Matteo's behavior. At least the girls weren't being drugged or otherwise physically endangered. She signed the papers, confirming she had reviewed the results as Elena headed back toward the exit to find Matteo and his daughters. She saw them already making their way inside. Matteo carried the sleeping Luciane, his arms, while the older girls trudged alongside him, their movements sluggish with fatigue. The lab tests are clear. Elena informed him with a professional smile. We can proceed with the vaccinations. Now she guided them into the treatment room, where the vaccines had already been set out in advance. The girls settled quietly in a row, their eyelids drooping with fatigue. Except for Lucia, who sat alert in her father's arms, her bright eyes wide with the energy typical of a 5-year-old. At this hour, it always amazed Elena how little ones somehow found their second wind in the evenings. Elena prepared the first dose, explaining the vaccination process to Matteo and the girls. Each girl will receive 4 injections, 1 for diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis combined with polio, 1 for measles, mumps, rubella, and varicella, and separate ones for hepatitis A and hepatitis B. She began with Sophia, administering each injection carefully and praising her for staying still. The girl barely reacted to the needles, her expression remaining blank. Isabella was similarly stoic during her turn as Eleanor prepared to vaccinate Valentina. The girl's face suddenly palled. I feel sick, she whispered the first words Eleanor had heard her speak. Do you need to use the bathroom? Elena asked gently. I can walk with you. Before Valentina could answer, Matteo stood. I'll take her, he said, firmly gripping his daughter's arm. Where is the bathroom? Elena pointed to the door across the hall. Right there. Matteo called for Lucia, the youngest, to come with him as he guided Valentina toward the door. But Elena gently intervened, assuring him that Lucia could stay with her, when Valentina suddenly gagged Matteo, hurried her to the bathroom, leaving Lucia behind. For the first time since meeting the family, Elena found herself alone with the children, free, if only briefly, from their father's ever-watchful presence. Sophia and Isabella sat still, their eyes downcast, but Lucia suddenly perked up. She approached Elena with unexpected animation. Dad told us we're going to USA, she said, her voice small but excited. Elena smiled, charmed by the child's enthusiasm. That's right. Dad said we can dance and we'll get famous, Lucia continued, beginning to sway her little body in an impromptu dance. Will you dance with me? I'm sorry. Sweetie, I can't dance right now, Elena replied gently, surprised by the girl's sudden talkativeness. I have to give you your shots undeterred. Lucia continued dancing on her own, raising her arms above her head in joyful movements. As the child's sleeve pulled back, Elena noticed something on her right arm, a series of small bruises that looked like pinprick marks, similar to those left by IV injections. She hadn't noticed them when she had drawn blood from the other arm. Lucia, what happened here? Elena asked, gently touching the marks. The little girl paused her dancing and looked at her own arm with mild curiosity. I was sick, she said. Simply Dad gave me some medicine. Elena's heart rate quickened at the hospital. Lucia shook her head. No, though he often gives me medicine. He says I'm sick. Her voice dropped to a whisper. The medicine makes me sleepy all the time, even when I want to. Elena struggled to keep her expression neutral despite the alarm bells ringing in her mind. When was the last time he gave you medicine? Before we came here, Lucia replied, resuming her dance. Elena's gaze shifted to the other girls. She pulled out her penlight and quickly checked their pupils, finding them slightly dilated, though not dramatically. So she checked their arms, and all of them have pin-prick marks. The pieces suddenly clicked together. Matteo could be drugging the children with mild sedatives to keep them quiet and compliant, but this didn't make sense with the lab results she had just reviewed. If the girls had drugs in their system, the blood tests should have shown it acting on instinct, driven by her growing suspicion. Elena swiftly grabbed a syringe and blood collection equipment from a nearby drawer. She knew it was against protocol, and if Matteo or anyone else caught her, she could be in serious trouble. But something didn't add up. The girls weren't just sleepy, they were under something. Lucia, she said softly, her voice barely betraying her unease. I need to take just a little more blood from you and your sisters. Okay. The girl nodded trustingly, extending her arm without question. Elena worked rapidly, taking a small blood sample from Lucia, then from Anna, Isabella, and Sophia. Each girl complied without resistance, their docility now seeming sinister rather than merely unusual. Elena labeled each sample carefully, then concealed them in one of the cabinet just as the door opened. And Matteo returned with Valentina. She's feeling sick. Matteo reported, his voice tinged with irritation. He whispered something to Valentina, who kept her eyes lowered. Get a hold of yourself, Elena heard him say. This is just vaccination. Don't act like a baby. It's perfectly normal to feel nervous before vaccination. Elena assured them both, though her attention was drawn to Lucia, who was now dancing energetically around the room, seemingly becoming more alert by the minute. A stark contrast to the quiet, drowsy girl Elena had first seen if she had been given something earlier. It seemed like the sedative, whatever it was starting to wear off Lucia's sudden burst of energy. Only deepened Elena's suspicion, and she couldn't help but compare Lucia's burst of energy with the other girls, who remained eerily still and sluggish in their seats. Matteo stared at Elena, then at his youngest daughter, his expression darkening. Lucia, he said sharply, sit down. Elena sensed the tension rising in the room. Perhaps we should take a short break, she suggested, moving toward the door. I'll give you all a minute, but as she reached for the door handle, a chill ran down her spine. Matteo was watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch in her throat. Before Elena could grasp the handle, Matteo stepped forward and closed the door. The soft click of the lock engaging sending a wave of fear through her. He stood between her and the exit, his previously nervous demeanor replaced by something far more menacing. You know, don't you? His voice was low measured. Elena forced herself to appear confused. I'm sorry, I don't understand what you mean. Matteo's eyes narrowed as he studied her face. A slow, humorless smile spread across his features. I think you do. Lucia must have said something. She's a little radio, that one, he said then, with a swift movement that made Elena gasp. He reached into his waistband and pulled out a small handgun. The girls remained eerily quiet, even little Lucia freezing in place at the sight of the weapon. Only Valentina made ear, small whimpering. Sound quickly silenced by a sharp glance from her father. Please, Elena whispered, raising her hand slightly. There's no need for that. I really don't know what you're talking about. Matteo's laugh echoed through the sterile examination room, sending a chill down Elena's spine. Yes, you do, he said. his voice cold. As he fixed his gaze on the rolled-up sleeves of the girl's arms, Elena realized with a sudden jolt that she had forgotten to loosen them after taking their blood samples in her rush. "You saw their needle marks, didn't you?" Matteo continued his tone, unnervingly calm. "And now that you know there are only two ways out of this situation." He took a step closer, the gun steady in his hand. Its presence assailant but deadly threat, option 1. "I kill you with this silent gun and lock this room, you'll bleed out before anyone finds you tomorrow when the clinic reopens. And by then I'll be long gone. I have friends here too who can help me." Elena felt the blood drain from her face, her heart hammering so loudly she was sure everyone in the room could hear it. The hidden blood samples felt like they were burning a hole in the drawer too. Matteo continued, "We work together. I'll give you a portion of what I earn after I get the girls across the U.S. border." He named a figure that made Elena's eyes widened. Despite her fear, even a quarter of that would make you rich. You could leave this ratchet part of the USA for somewhere better. We both win. He gestured toward the girls with his free hand. "I wouldn't like option 1 either, because then it becomes a mess." His voice hardened. "So what's it going to be, nurse?" Elena, the blade-like edge of the gun pressed against Elena's cheek. Cold and unforgiving pleas. She begged, genuine tears welling in her eyes. "I promise I won't say anything. Just please don't hurt me or the girls." Matteo studied her.